The moment you stop fighting for closeness is the moment an avoidant starts questioning their distance. Avoidants aren't used to people who get them without pressure. When you say, I understand, you're not validating the distance, you're validating their internal world, and that hits them deeper than affection. Because for an avoidant, being understood is safer than being loved. Love feels demanding. Love feels like expectation. Love feels like something they can lose or disappoint. But being understood, that feels like relief. That feels like exhaling for the first time. That feels like someone is finally standing in the same emotional room they've been locked in alone for years. And suddenly, without you pushing, without you pleading, without you over-explaining your needs or your worth, something subtle but powerful happens. You stop being the person chasing them and you become the person who sees them, really sees them. And trust me, avoidants think about the people who make them feel seen, because for most of their life, no one ever has. Avoidants don't grow up in environments where emotions felt safe or welcomed. They learned early that connection comes with strings, that closeness is unpredictable, and that the best way to avoid pain is to avoid vulnerability. So when someone comes into their life who says calmly and without fear, I understand, it disrupts their entire emotional pattern. It confuses their nervous system. It makes them pause and ask themselves questions they rarely dare to think about. Wait, why does this actually feel good? Why doesn't this feel like pressure? Why do I suddenly feel calmer around them? Your understanding becomes the one thing they didn't realize they were starved for. And here's what makes this phrase so magnetic to an avoidant. It removes the battlefield. Most people push them for closeness. Most people express hurt, confusion, or frustration when the avoidant pulls back. And every time that happens, the avoidant retreats deeper, convinced that intimacy is dangerous and suffocating. But when you confidently say, I understand, you're showing them that you're not threatened by their coping mechanisms. You're not shaken by their temporary withdrawal. You're not trying to force them into a space they're not ready to enter. You're doing the one thing they never expect. You're giving them emotional room to breathe. And that breath, that moment of safety, becomes addictive. Because unlike pressure, understanding doesn't chase them. It draws them in. When you say, I understand, you're sending the most powerful subconscious message an avoidant can receive. Your feelings make sense here, and it's not about coddling them or enabling distance. It's about showing that you're grounded enough to not take their patterns personally. This emotional neutrality is rare for them, rare and unforgettable. It stands out in their memory like a warm light in a room full of alarms. They don't forget the person who doesn't react. They don't forget the person who doesn't guilt them. They don't forget the person who stays centered while they pull away. And here's the twist. Once they realize you're not chasing, they start noticing the silence. They start wondering what you're thinking. They start replaying your tone, your calmness, your lack of panic. They start recognizing that you're not the kind of person who needs them. You're the kind of person who chooses them. And for an avoidant, that distinction is everything. Your calm understanding becomes the one emotional space in their life where they don't feel judged or pressured. And that is exactly why they begin to think about you nonstop. They wonder how you stay so composed. They wonder why they felt so at ease around you. They wonder why your energy feels different from everyone else's before you. This is the moment the avoidant mindset starts shifting. Not because you demanded closeness, but because you showed them it was safe. When you say, I understand, you're communicating self-confidence, stability, and emotional maturity. 3 qualities avoidants crave but rarely trust. And when those qualities show up in one person, consistently and calmly, it triggers a deep psychological imprint. This is the person I can come back to. Not because you're a fallback, not because you're waiting, but because they feel a kind of safety with you that their nervous system has been craving since childhood. Understanding opens the door, not pressure, not arguments, not emotional spirals, just this. I understand. It makes them rethink their distance. It makes them rethink their withdrawal. It makes them rethink their assumptions about you, about the connection, and about themselves. It's the first phrase that makes them feel emotionally acknowledged instead of emotionally threatened. It's the first phrase that makes them feel safe. instead of suffocated. It's the first phrase that makes them see you not as someone who wants something from them, but as someone who respects them. And an avoidant will replay that feeling again and again, even in silence, even in separation, even while pretending they don't care. That's why they think about you nonstop. You became the first person who didn't chase their walls. You understood them. And that, to an avoidant, is unforgettable. Give an avoidant space without punishment, and they won't know how to handle the freedom. Avoidants recoil when people demand emotional closeness. The more someone pushes, the more they feel their internal alarms go off. But when you tell them, take your time, something inside them shifts in a way they can't explain. Because this phrase is the opposite of what they expect. You're not pressuring. You're not clinging. You're not trying to force reassurance out of them. You're not hovering over their emotional rhythm with fear or urgency. Instead, you're calmly letting them be wherever they are, without punishment, without resentment, without emotional explosions. And that kind of space, clean, steady, uncharged, feels safer than anything they've ever known. To an avoidant, autonomy isn't just a preference, it's protection. It's survival. Their entire emotional system is wired to defend their independence, because somewhere in their past, closeness equaled loss of control. So when someone says, take your time, what they actually hear is, you're free, I won't suffocate you. I'm not here to chase you or cage you. And that freedom, real, unconditional freedom, becomes the very thing that starts drawing them closer to you, because there's no threat attached to it. There's no hidden pressure. There's no expectation they can disappoint. You're not using space as punishment. You're using space as respect. And that difference hits them in a place they didn't know they were vulnerable. Most people weaponize silence with an avoidant. Most people try to guilt them back into connection. Most people make space feel like abandonment, anger, or emotional consequences. But you're making space feel like safety, which means you suddenly become the one person they associate with peace. Instead of pressure, and avoidance always move toward the person who feels peaceful. No matter how long it takes, no matter how slow they go, no matter how much they pretend they don't need anyone. Because when their nervous system calms around you, you become unforgettable. Take your time is also the sentence that exposes their internal conflict. On the surface, avoidants crave space, but deep down, they fear the consequences of it, losing you, disappointing you, being misunderstood, or realizing they actually care more than they admit. So when you allow space without fear or anger, they don't know what to do with the freedom. It throws off their pattern. Normally, space creates emotional distance, but with you, space creates curiosity. With you, space creates awareness. With you, space creates longing. Because now you're not the one trying to control them. You're the one they start missing in the silence. You become the voice in their mind when everything else goes quiet. You become the person they think about when they're alone. You become the only presence in their life that doesn't feel like a trap. The moment you give them time without pressure is the moment they begin noticing the difference between silence that feels safe and silence that feels like loss. And when they realize you aren't chasing them, they start wondering why. They start wondering they start wondering if you're still invested. They start wondering if you've moved on. And that wondering becomes emotional gravity. Take your time, turns you from the pursuer into the prize. Because here's the truth, avoidance. Don't tell anyone. They don't actually want unlimited space. They want the option of space. They want to know they won't be punished for needing a moment to breathe. But they also want connection on their terms, at their pace, with someone who feels safe enough to return to. So when you give them time without falling apart, without forcing conversations, without demanding emotional explanations, you show them you're grounded enough for real connection. You show them you're not ruled by fear or neediness. You show them you can handle their pace, maybe even better than they can. And it's in that quiet, respectful space that they begin to recognize their own desire emerging. They start craving your presence, your voice, your calmness, your energy. Avoidants don't return to people who pressure them. They return to people who don't. And when you say, take your time, you're telling them, I'm not waiting on you, but I'm not afraid of you either. That combination, independent but open, steady but unattached, is what keeps them thinking about you long after you've stopped reaching out, because they're not used to someone who doesn't make their distance personal. They're not used to someone who doesn't crumble when they pull back. They're not used to someone who doesn't demand immediate closeness. You become the person who doesn't chase. You become the person who doesn't cling. You become the person who doesn't collapse. And that makes you the person they can't forget. Take your time becomes a mirror. It forces them to sit with themselves. It exposes the emptiness of their own distance. It reveals that the freedom they fought for doesn't feel as satisfying when they're not sure you'll still be there. And the moment they feel that subtle panic, what if they stop caring, is the moment they start moving toward you. Because for the first time, space isn't a defense mechanism. It's a chance to choose you. And avoidants think about the people they choose. Take your time isn't weakness. It's confidence. It's emotional mastery. It's knowing that your groundedness is more compelling than any pressure ever could be. And that's why in the silence, in the distance, in the quiet hours, when no one is watching, you're the one they think about the most. Nothing haunts an avoidant more than someone who isn't bothered by their distance. Saying I'm good seems like the simplest phrase in the world, but to an avoidant, it is psychological disruption. This one sentence tells them everything they don't want to hear and everything they don't know how to process. Because in that moment, without raising your voice, without falling apart, without chasing, without pleading for reassurance, you're sending a message they've spent their entire life avoiding. You are emotionally self-sufficient. You're not spiraling. You're not waiting for them to fix anything. You're not sitting there holding your breath until they decide you're worthy of closeness again. And most importantly, you're not emotionally dependent on their response. You're calm, centered, grounded, and that calmness is something they don't know how to handle. Avoidants operate on an emotional pattern. Pull back, wait for a reaction, confirm that the other person is affected, and then feel justified in staying distant. It's a cycle, it's protection, it's predictable. But when you say, I'm good, you break that cycle cleanly and quietly. You refuse to react the way every other person before you did. You're not chasing them. You're not showing fear. You're not showing irritation. You're not trying to reopen the conversation. You're not trying to convince them that your intentions are pure. You're simply sending a signal that their distance does not destabilize your internal world. This is the phrase that flips their entire emotional strategy, because whether they admit it or not, avoidants rely on a subtle sense of control, emotional control, energetic control, narrative control. They feel safe when they believe they can predict your reactions, when they sense that their withdrawal has an impact, when they see that you are affected. That doesn't mean they want to hurt you. It means distance is their language and reactions are their feedback. So when they pull back and you calmly say, I'm good, it removes their emotional compass. It strips them of certainty. It denies them the reassurance that you're still orbiting around their pattern. And when they can't destabilize you, when their distance doesn't make you wobble, when their silence doesn't make you anxious, their mind unexpectedly snaps back to you. Avoidants don't obsess over closeness. They obsess over what they can't predict. And nothing is more unpredictable to them than someone who stays calm without their reassurance. That calmness becomes a psychological echo in their mind. Suddenly, the thought loop begins. What are they doing? Why aren't they reacting? Why are they so calm? Did I just lose them? This loop is where desire is born. Not because you manipulated them, but because you broke the emotional pattern that kept them safe from their own vulnerability. I'm good signals that you have your own emotional ecosystem, one they aren't in control of, one they aren't the center of, and that shakes them. Because as much as avoidants fear intimacy, they fear insignificance even more. They fear being irrelevant. They fear being unneeded. They fear being replaced, and your calmness suggests that you might be living just fine without their presence. That possibility haunts them. I'm good is also the moment they see you differently. They no longer see you as someone waiting on their next move. They no longer see you as someone fragile or dependent. They no longer see you as someone defined by their attention. Instead, you become someone with depth, someone with a life, someone with emotional self-control, someone who doesn't collapse under the weight of uncertainty. And ironically, this steadiness is the exact thing avoidants are drawn to long-term. Not the chaos, not the neediness, not the pursuit, but the person who has a stable inner world. Your emotional neutrality becomes magnetic because it speaks to something they crave but rarely find. Someone who can handle their space without taking it personally. And when you tell them, I'm good, they suddenly feel something they aren't used to feeling. Tension. Not the tense discomfort of conflict, but the tense awareness of losing the invisible emotional thread they thought you'd always hold on to. Now the question shifts from will they chase to wait. What if they don't? And that question is powerful. It creates a pull. It creates curiosity. It creates emotional gravity. Avoidants often assume that people will abandon them if they don't constantly maintain distance. But when you say, I'm good, you take away both extremes. You're not clinging, you're not leaving, you're simply existing outside their emotional rules. That neutrality is disruptive and fascinating. It makes them reevaluate the entire connection because now the power dynamic has shifted. They're no longer the one in control. They're no longer the one dictating the pace. They're no longer the one managing the emotional tone. You are. And your groundedness becomes a mirror for their internal instability. They start noticing the difference between your emotional strength and their emotional avoidance. They start realizing that you don't need them, which paradoxically makes them want you more. Because avoidants don't desire what overwhelms them. They desire what feels safe. They desire what feels steady. They desire what is not threatening, not chaotic, not demanding. And nothing feels safer to them than someone who is good on their own. And good is not disinterest. It's emotional maturity. It's confidence. It's subtle detachment in the healthiest way, and avoidants are irresistibly drawn to that. This phrase makes them see you as someone who might slip out of their life quietly, not because you're punishing them, but because you're simply not dependent on them. That's the scenario that wakes them up. That's the scenario that makes their emotional walls crack. That's the scenario that triggers the very thing they try to avoid, the desire to reconnect. Because desire for an avoidant is dangerous. It means opening up. It means admitting care. It means risking vulnerability. But when you calmly say, I'm good, you make desire feel safer. You make vulnerability feel less like a threat and more like a choice. You become the one person who didn't demand closeness, and that's exactly why they start craving it. I'm good is not a phrase that pushes them away. It's the phrase that pulls them toward you, slowly, reluctantly, subconsciously, until they can't stop thinking about you. Because in a world where everyone reacts to their distance, you're the rare one who doesn't, and that makes you unforgettable. Say these 3 phrases, not with manipulation, but with self-possession. And an avoidant won't be able to stop thinking about you because you'll be the first person who feels safe, strong, and completely unattached to their chaos. When it comes to avoidance, people spend years trying to decode their silence, their distance, their mixed signals, their disappearances, their sudden warmth, followed by sudden withdrawal. But the truth is this, avoidants don't respond to pressure. They don't respond to emotional intensity. They don't respond to people trying to crack them open or force clarity out of them. What they respond to is stability. What they respect is calmness. What shakes them is self-possession. And what pulls them closer, what makes them think about you long after you've stopped thinking about them, is the kind of grounded energy that doesn't bend around their avoidance or crumble under their emotional unpredictability. These 3 phrases, I understand, take your time, I'm good, are not lines, techniques, or tricks. They are reflections of something deeper, a sense of inner alignment that they can't help but feel drawn to. An avoidance mind is a battlefield they learn to survive, not a place they learn to feel safe. So when someone comes along who communicates without fear, without neediness, without emotional volatility, it disrupts their entire pattern. Not because you're manipulating them, but because your energy speaks the language they were always waiting for. When you say, I understand, you enter their world without forcing them to step into yours. You show them that you can see their emotional rhythm without trying to change it. When you say, take your time, you offer them space without making them pay for it. You don't punish them for being triggered, overwhelmed, or slow to open. And when you say, I'm good, you show them you are your own anchor, not someone who collapses under uncertainty or chases after reassurance. This combination creates a presence they almost never encounter, someone who feels safe but not self-sacrificial, calm but not detached, open but not needy. And that is the presence that stays in their mind long after physical distance sets in. This is what lingers in the quiet hours when they're alone. This is what echoes in their memory when they replay your conversations. This is what breaks through their emotional defenses when they least expect it. Avoidants are used to being misunderstood. They're used to people panicking around their silence. They're used to being told they're cold, distant, confusing, or emotionally unavailable. They're used to others demanding explanations they can't give and closeness they're afraid to offer. But when you come into their life with a sense of self-possession, when your emotional world doesn't collapse around theirs, you become a rarity. And avoidants don't forget the rare one. Your energy becomes the contrast. Your calm becomes the memory. Your strength becomes the standard. You become the person who didn't try to fix them, change them, decode them, or drag them out of their emotional shadows. Instead, you simply stood there whole within yourself, and that alone made them question everything they thought they understood about closeness. Because here's the truth, avoidants don't avoid you. They avoid themselves, their own feelings, their own vulnerability, the part of them that wants connection, but fears it just as deeply. But when you use these phrases from a place of genuine inner power, you show them that connection doesn't have to be chaotic. It doesn't have to be consuming. It doesn't have to feel like surrendering control with you. Closeness becomes spacious, not suffocative, with you. Emotional presence becomes steady, not overwhelming, with you. Intimacy becomes an invitation, not a demand. And that's when the shift happens. That's when they start thinking about you without meaning to. That's when they start remembering the tone of your voice. That's when your calmness becomes magnetic. That's when your energy becomes a contrast to every frantic interaction they've had in the past. That's when your groundedness becomes the thing they crave, not because they need you to hold them together, but because you remind them of a version of themselves they've never accessed before. You show them that connection can feel like freedom instead of pressure. You show them that space can coexist with closeness. You show them that emotion can be steady, not chaotic. You show them that care can be soft, not demanding. You show them that love doesn't have to be a battlefield, and that's a revelation they carry with them long after you walk away. And the irony, the more at peace you are with yourself, the more they feel pulled toward you. Because avoidants don't fall for intensity, they fall for stability. They fall for presence. They fall for people who move through the world with grounded confidence and emotional neutrality. You become the one person who isn't hooked into their patterns. You become the one person whose emotional center they can't shake. You become the one person who doesn't lose themselves trying to understand them. And that's the one thing avoidance can't resist. Not the chase, not the drama, not the longing, not the explosions, but the quiet, powerful, steady energy of someone who is whole within themselves. So yes, say these phrases, but say them from a place of self-possession. Say them because you mean them, not because you expect a reaction. Say them because they reflect who you are, not because you want to trigger a response. Because when these words come from genuine emotional alignment rather than strategy, they become magnetic. They become unforgettable. They become the reason an avoidant keeps thinking about you, even when they're trying not to. They become the reason your presence lingers in their mind, even in silence. They become the reason they look back and wonder how someone could be so calm, so steady, so unbothered, so secure. And that's when it hits them. You weren't trying to control them. You weren't trying to win them. You weren't trying to break their walls. You were simply you, whole, grounded, balanced. And that is the presence avoidants come back to. That is the person they think about. That is the connection they don't forget. Because in a world where everyone reacts to their chaos, you become the one person who rises above it. And that makes you unforgettable.